The phone felt heavier than it should have, warm in my hand, buzzing against the quiet of my kitchen while rain tapped softly at the window. I remember the clock light glowing blue, the hum of the refrigerator, the strange calm settling in my chest as I listened and realized something had been taken from me that could not be put back. My heart didn't race. It went still, like it was bracing for impact. If you've ever trusted someone who shared your blood and learned too late what that trust cost, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. You're not as alone as you think. I stood there barefoot on cold tile, staring at the envelope on the counter, knowing in my bones that love had just been used as a weapon. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I felt the ground shift beneath everything I believed about family, safety, and sacrifice. That quiet moment was the beginning of something I never saw coming. My son called me late in the afternoon and told me he was getting married the next day. In the same breath, I understood that my savings were gone and my house had been sold. There was no pause, no explanation, no apology, just information delivered as if my life were an inconvenience he needed cleared away. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone long after the call ended. The room was quiet, ordinary, and I noticed that I wasn't screaming or crying. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because something inside me recognized the shape of a mistake that wasn't mine. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 63 years old, and until that moment, I believed my life was settled. I lived carefully, paid my bills, followed routines built over decades. I thought stability meant safety. As the silence stretched, a strange calm took hold. He thought I would panic. He thought I would beg. He thought years of being a mother had made me small and easy to erase. What he did not know, as I stood there breathing in that quiet kitchen, was that he had misjudged me completely. And before I explain who I was before that call, you need to understand this. I was never as unprepared as he believed. Before that call, my life moved at a steady, predictable pace. I lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Dayton, Ohio, in a house that never tried to impress anyone. Mornings began the same way for years. Coffee at the kitchen table, the paper folded just so. A few minutes of silence before the day asked anything of me. I had been a widow since my early 30s. Losing my husband meant learning quickly how to be everything at once. Provider, parent, problem solver. I worked office jobs that paid reliably, never chasing excitement, only security. I learned how to stretch a dollar, how to save without resentment, how to build a life that would not collapse if something went wrong. Raising my son became the center of every decision I made. I skipped vacations, turned down risks, and put my own wants quietly aside. I told myself that sacrifice was temporary and purpose was permanent. Watching him grow into a capable adult felt like proof that the choices had been worth it. By my early 60s, life felt settled. Bills were paid. Routines were familiar. I had modest savings and the comfort of knowing where I stood. I was not wealthy, but I felt secure, and security mattered more to me than anything flashy. Trust sat at the center of that peace. I trusted the systems I built, the habits I kept, and most of all, I trusted my son. I believed trust was the reward for a life lived carefully, imagining how that belief could be used against me. I believed that love meant trust, and trust meant not keeping score. For most of my life, that belief had served me well. It kept my relationships simple and my conscience clear. So when my son began asking gentle questions about my finances, I heard concern, not calculation. He spoke about my age, about how easy it was to forget things, about wanting to help if something ever happened. I felt a tightening in my chest, a quiet resistance I could not quite name. I had always handled my own affairs. Numbers made sense to me. Control felt like dignity. Still, I hesitated to push back. I did not want to become the kind of parent who guarded everything out of fear. I worried that saying no would sound like distrust, and distrust felt like a failure of love. So I chose a compromise. I allowed limited access, nothing dramatic, only the ability to view accounts and step in during emergencies. I told myself boundaries made it safe. Looking back, I see how kindness can shift power without announcing itself. Trust changes a relationship the moment it is formalized. It creates permission where there once was distance. At the time, I believed I was doing the responsible, loving thing. I did not understand that even careful trust, once given, cannot be taken back unchanged. And that decision quietly opened the door to everything I would soon have to face alone. I began noticing small shifts I could not quite place. When my son visited, his eyes moved through my home differently, lingering on furniture, pausing on walls, measuring rather than remembering. He asked casual questions about repairs, about property values in the area, about what things were worth now compared to before. Each moment felt harmless on its own. I told myself I was being sensitive. That age makes you suspicious of change. I reminded myself that concern often sounds practical. When he asked about mortgages or future plans, I framed it as planning ahead, not inventory. There were moments that unsettled me more. He spoke about my life as if it were a set of numbers to organize. He made suggestions that felt efficient but strangely impersonal. I noticed how quickly conversations turned toward money, how rarely they lingered on how I was actually feeling. Still, I explained it away. I believed good intentions should be assumed, especially within family. I worried that questioning him would make me seem ungrateful or paranoid, so I stayed quiet and told myself, love sometimes feels awkward. Only later did I understand the pattern forming beneath those moments. Concern asks about your well-being. Calculation studies your assets. At the time, I did not have words for that difference. I only had a growing sense of unease that I kept folded neatly away, unaware that soon it would surface in a way I could no longer deny. That quiet instinct waited patiently, gathering weight, until truth arrived with evidence strong enough to break the careful stories I had been telling myself all along inside. I checked my accounts the way I always did, on a Sunday morning, coffee cooling beside me, the house still asleep. It was a ritual that grounded me. Numbers had always been where I found reassurance. The screen loaded and something felt wrong immediately. The savings balance was almost empty. I stared, certain I was misreading it. I refreshed the page. I logged out and back in. The number did not change. My checking account was nearly the same, reduced to a few dollars. Like an afterthought, my body went still. Not panic, not tears, just a strange heaviness that settled into my chest. I sat there longer than I can explain, waiting for logic to correct the mistake. I called the bank with hands that felt distant from me. I listened carefully as the representative reviewed recent activity, large transfers, multiple withdrawals, all authorized through online access. Then I heard where the money had gone. It was sent to an account in my son's name. The room seemed to pull away from me. I thanked the woman on the phone and ended the call without asking anything else. I did not accuse. I did not demand answers. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall, feeling something fundamental give way inside me. The money was not lost. It had been taken, and the person who took it was the one I trusted most. As the afternoon light shifted across the floor, my phone rang again, and I knew the truth was about to speak for itself. The phone rang not long after I put it down. I remember thinking, for a brief and foolish second, that this might be the moment where everything corrected itself. Instead, his voice came through light and hurried, filled with excitement that had nothing to do with me. He spoke as if nothing were wrong, as if draining my accounts were a minor detail attached to better news. He explained, almost cheerfully, that he had taken the money because he needed it. He spoke about starting his life, about plans already made, about how I would manage just fine without what I had saved for decades. I felt myself listening from a distance. When I tried to ground the conversation in reality, to express what that money represented, he brushed it aside. He reduced my future to a list of benefits and smaller needs, as if my life were already winding down. Then he mentioned the house. He told me it had been sold. He explained there would be a deadline, a fixed amount of time before I needed to be out. The words landed without weight in his voice, delivered like an administrative update. Before I could respond, the call ended. Not dramatically. Simply ended, as if something more important required his attention. I sat there holding my phone, feeling the final thread of trust snap quietly. That was the moment I understood this was not confusion or panic on his part. It was entitlement. And as the shock faded, something colder and clearer began to take its place. After the call ended, I sat very still. The shock was still there, but it was thinning, giving way to something unexpected. I laughed softly, not from relief yet, but from recognition. He believed he had taken everything. He was wrong. The house he spoke about with such certainty was not the home I was sitting in. It was a small rental property I had purchased years earlier, a quiet safety net meant to supplement my income. Long before any of this, I had made sure it was occupied by reliable tenants with a valid lease still in place. That detail mattered more than he understood. Selling a property with an active lease without disclosure is not a simple mistake. It creates problems. Serious ones. Problems that do not disappear just because paperwork was rushed or assumptions were made. As I sat there, the fear that had tightened my chest began to loosen. He thought he had erased my stability in a single transaction. What he had actually done was expose himself to consequences he had not anticipated. I had not planned this moment. I had not set a trap. I had simply lived carefully for a long time, building layers of protection I never imagined I would need against my own child. For the first time since the phone rang, clarity replaced panic. This was not the end of my life. It was the beginning of understanding how deeply he had misjudged me, and how many things he thought were his to take had never been within his reach at all. Once that truth settled, another followed just as quietly. The house I was sitting in, the place I called home, was never in my personal name at all. Years earlier, after watching friends lose everything to illness or bad timing, I had placed it inside a simple family trust, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. That decision meant something important now. No single person could sell it, transfer it, or touch it without proper authority. Not even my son. The walls around me were not fragile. They were protected by choices I had made long before I imagined needing them. He believed I was cornered, reduced to nothing but paperwork and deadlines. In reality, I was standing in a home that was legally untouchable, drinking coffee at my own table, breathing steadily. The contrast was almost startling. I did not feel clever. I felt grounded. This was not a trick or a loophole. It was the result of living through loss once and deciding I would not leave my future exposed again. As the weight of that realization settled, fear finally released its grip. What remained was control. And with control came something else I had not yet allowed myself to consider. Now that I knew where I stood, I had to decide who I would be next. I sat at my kitchen table and let the quiet stretch. The panic had passed. The fear had loosened. What remained was a question I could not avoid anymore. What kind of mother was I going to be now for decades? Protecting my son had been instinct. I stepped in, absorbed the cost, smoothed consequences before they reached him. Part of me still wanted to do that, to fix this quietly and spare him the weight of what he had done. But another part of me understood that protection had brought us here. This was not about anger or revenge. It was about survival, about dignity, about whether I would continue to disappear so someone else could stay comfortable. I realized that shielding him again would not be kindness. It would be permission. So I slowed everything down. I made coffee. I pulled out folders I had kept for years and reviewed them line by line. Bank statements, property records, trust documents. Facts steadied me more than emotion ever could. I wrote notes in a small notebook, not dramatic plans, just clear steps: who to call, what to confirm, what to leave untouched. I refused to rush. Knowing fear creates mistakes, and patience creates leverage. By the time the sun shifted across the room, my decision was made. I would not protect him from consequences, and I would not destroy myself to prove love. I would move forward carefully, deliberately, and without asking permission. In the days ahead, truth would finally answer back. He showed up without warning a few days later, carrying the same certainty I had heard in his voice on the phone. His body was tense, restless, already preparing for resistance. I stayed seated. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. I simply let him speak until the confidence began to falter on its own. I watched confusion replace irritation as he realized things were not unfolding the way he expected. Questions surfaced that no longer sounded rhetorical. Deadlines suddenly felt less solid. I answered calmly, naming facts instead of feelings, consequences instead of accusations. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I stated what was true. That was the moment something shifted. His posture changed. The certainty drained from his face as he understood that the money was traceable. The sale was not clean, and my home was not his leverage. What he had mistaken for weakness had been restraint. Inside me, there was no triumph, only clarity. I saw my son not as someone in control, but as someone cornered by his own assumptions. For the first time, he was listening instead of taking. When he left, the house felt different, quieter, steadier. The balance between us had changed in a way that could not be undone. He no longer stood above me. Whatever came next would no longer be on his terms. Time did what confrontation could not. It moved forward, quietly, without needing my involvement. Days passed, then weeks. The bank completed its review and froze the remaining access without drama. Transfers were flagged, timelines reconstructed, and records preserved. I answered questions once, clearly, and then returned to my routines. Paper followed paper. The sale triggered complications that could not be undone with confidence or charm. Professionals began asking for explanations he could not provide. Appointments were missed. Calls went unanswered. I learned these things indirectly, through notices and updates, not gossip. I did not pursue information. It arrived on its own, at home. My life stayed small and steady. I woke early. I made coffee. I watered the plants and paid the bills. I did not call him. I did not warn him. I did not celebrate. Accountability did not require my emotion to function. What struck me most was how ordinary it all felt. Consequences did not announce themselves. They did not argue or accuse. They simply accumulated, one document at a time. Once the truth was written down and allowed to stand, people sometimes imagine justice as loud or satisfying. For me, it was neither. It was procedural. It was quiet, and it worked without my pushing. Still, relief did not rush in to fill the space. Knowing I was protected did not erase what had been lost. As the systems did their work, I began to understand that accountability and healing do not arrive together, and the cost of this would surface in ways paperwork could not measure. That truth followed me long after everything else settled. After everything settled, there was no rush of relief, no sense of winning. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the chaos before it. I had protected myself, but I had also lost something I could not recover. What it cost me was not just money or time. It was the version of my son I had carried for decades, the boy I believed would never see me as a resource instead of a person. Letting go of that illusion hurt more than any account balance ever could. I grieved privately. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. I grieved the trust I gave freely and will never give in the same way again. I grieved the ease that once existed between us, the assumption that love alone would keep us safe. I still love him. That did not disappear. But love no longer comes with access. It no longer means protection from consequences or shelter from reality. That boundary was not built out of anger. It was built out of clarity. Standing up for myself required accepting a truth I had avoided. Some relationships change permanently once harm is acknowledged. Seeing clearly carries a cost, and this was mine. As painful as that realization was, it also stripped away denial. What remained was not bitterness, but a sober understanding that strength sometimes looks like grief, and wisdom often arrives only after something precious is gone. I accepted that quietly, fully. I learned the lesson later in life than I expected, but it was still mine to learn. What happened to me was not just a family conflict, it was a pattern I now recognize clearly. Financial harm rarely announces itself as abuse. It often arrives wrapped in concern, framed as help, justified by shared history. It grows quietly in relationships where love has been used as proof that boundaries are unnecessary. I believed trust was the highest form of care. I was wrong about that. I was raised to think sacrifice was love, that good parents stayed silent, absorbed discomfort, and never said no when their children asked. That belief shaped my choices long before my son touched my finances. It taught me to ignore unease and call it generosity. What I know now is simple, and it is not cruel. Boundaries are not punishments. They are acknowledgments of dignity, including my own. Saying no does not mean I love less. It means I see clearly. If you are listening and something in this feels familiar, I want you to hear this gently. Confusion does not mean weakness. Love does not require self-erasure. You are allowed to protect what you worked for, even from people you love. I learned this late, after loss and grief, but learning late still matters. It changes what comes next, and it creates a quieter future, one built on truth instead of fear. That peace did not come instantly, but it arrived honestly, and it stayed once I stopped betraying myself at last now. I live quietly now. My mornings are simple, my routine steady, my home peaceful in a way it never was during those months of uncertainty. Nothing dramatic changed on the outside. What changed was inside me. I no longer measure love by how much I am willing to endure. I measure it by honesty, respect, and the ability to say no without fear. Choosing myself did not make me harder or colder. It made me calmer. It returned me to a version of myself that sleeps at night. Looking back, the chaos feels distant, almost muted. Not because it did not matter, but because it no longer defines me. Accountability did its work. Boundaries did theirs. I did not need revenge or vindication. I needed clarity, and I allowed it to stay. If there is one truth I hold on to now, it is this. Protecting your dignity is not an act of bitterness. It is an act of care, especially when love has been confused with sacrifice. You can hold compassion and limits at the same time. One does not cancel the other. If my story stirred something in you, I am grateful you stayed with me. You are not alone in navigating complicated family bonds or painful awakenings. If you feel comfortable, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your voice matters here, and if this story resonated, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. Sometimes quiet strength spreads simply by being named. Thank you for listening and for honoring your own boundaries moving forward today.